Good morning, shalom, assalamu alaikum. Welcome to the Justice Talks webinar series presented by Justice for All Canada. As we gather here today, let us acknowledge that we are on Treaty 6 territory in the homeland of the Métis. We honor and respect the First Nations and Métis ancestors who have inhabited this land and reaffirm our relationship with one another. I'm your host, Tazeen Hassan, Advocacy Manager for the Canadian West region at Justice for All Canada. Justice for All Canada is an esteemed human rights organization holding consultancy status at United Nations. Our mission is to combat the genocide and the indigenous nations and the persecution of minorities across the globe. At Justice for All Canada, we are actively engaged in various impactful human rights campaigns. Some examples include Save Our Kashmir Action, Save India from Fascism, Save Uyghurs, Burma Task Force, and Sri Lankan Task Force initiatives. One of our significant campaigns is Prisoner of Conscience campaign. Besides other prisoners, it is also focused on advocating for the rights of Palestinian children detained under the Israeli military detention. Today, our discussion will revolve around the lives of the Palestinians living in the occupied territories of the West Bank. Our distinguished guest is Asher Robert Kirchner, a member of the Steering Committee of Independent Jewish Voices. Asher is also the co-founder of the Reformed Jews for the Human Rights. Based in Edmonton, Asher is the former professor of linguistics at the University of Alberta. In 2022, Asher embarked on 2 trips to the West Bank, Palestine, where he lived with Palestinian families. Throughout his initial visit, he immersed himself in the daily lives of Palestinians for 3 months, accompanying Palestinian children to school. This first-hand encounter allowed him to witness the obstacles they encountered in the occupied territories as a result of the settlement expansions. An internationally recognized war crime, Asher also witnessed a night raid of the Israeli military in a West Bank village. Today, he's going to share his experiences, observations, and analysis. Welcome, Robert Asher Kirchner.
Thank you very much, Tazeen. So
now we commence. Yeah.
Okay, right. So I have to set up my screen share here. So let me do that.
Okay, I just want to add that audience won't be able to use the chat box, but they can post their questions in Q&A box. Welcome.
Thank you. So is everyone able to see my title slide now? Is that showing up correctly? I will assume so. Okay. So after retirement a few years ago, I began a deep dive into Jewish learning and observance. And the more I learned, the more I was troubled by a certain disconnect. On one hand, the central message of Jewish teaching is one of justice and compassion. This verse from Exodus is just one example. But on the other hand, I know that serious oppression of Palestinians has been done and continues to be done by the state of Israel, purporting to act in the name of the Jewish people, whom I'm a part of. So I felt a responsibility to join with other Jews in standing up and speaking out clearly in support of Palestinian human rights. When I heard about the Center for Jewish Nonviolence and their 3-month program of accompaniment of vulnerable Palestinians in the West Bank, I knew this was something I had to do. So from February to May of 2022, I was a volunteer activist with CJNV's project Hineinu, which means here we are in Hebrew, along with a handful of other Jewish volunteers from North America. We were hosted by and worked closely with a number of Palestinian activist partners. Here's a shot of us Hineinu volunteers, along with many of our Palestinian partners. And we stayed in 3 villages between the city of Yatta at the very south edge of the West Bank, an area called Masafar Yatta, which means the agricultural lands of Yatta in Arabic. And here you see circled from right to left the villages of El Khair, Duani, and Susia. I've circled one other village, Tuba, slightly to the south, which will figure in some of the stories I'll be telling you. We stayed in rudimentary dorm-style guest houses. The top middle picture is me sitting on a bunk bed in one of them in El Khair. And you'll see that the housing in these villages, for the most part, was rather makeshift. But this is how the Palestinians of this area are forced to live, because Israel does not recognize these villages and denies the residents building permits. And so any construction they do is deemed illegal and subject to demolition. The one exception is the town of Tuwani. Through superhuman nonviolent resistance campaigns over the last 2 decades, which garnered strong international support, Tuwani was able to build a school, to connect to the electricity grid, and most amazingly, to get approval from the occupation authorities for a certain amount of residential building, relatively protected from demolition. And the house you see in the picture at the bottom right is in Tuwani. You can see it's a well-built structure with a solid wall and a stone staircase leading down into a courtyard. So what did we do while we were there? Well, Tazeen already spoke to a couple of things. First of all, we accompanied children from the village of Tuba to and from school in Tuwani, and that was to protect them from settler attacks. There's supposed to be an army patrol to escort these kids past a nearby, extremely hostile Jewish settlement, but this army patrol sometimes shows up late, or they don't show up at all, and the whole time that the kids are waiting, they're vulnerable to attack. Palestinian adults can't accompany the kids because it's illegal for Palestinians to be, the adults anyway, to be that close to the settlement. So there's still a need for international or Israeli adults to accompany the kids as they wait. In the picture on the left here, you see a couple of us playing soccer with some of the boys on a day when the army showed up several hours late. And here's another clip showing one of us playing patty cake with one of the girls. Another big part of our work was accompaniment of Palestinian shepherds as they led their flocks of sheep and goats out to pasture. Some days were peaceful, but often these shepherds would get harassed or even attacked by settlers. If the shepherds wanted us to, we would then call the army or police when these attacks occurred, and sometimes the authorities showed up and sometimes they didn't, but not once did they arrest a settler. If they intervened at all, it was to order both sides to leave the area and go home, even though the Palestinians were on their own private land. A couple of times, army night raids occurred while we were staying in Tuwani, as Tazeen mentioned. These were not in response to any violence or criminal activity on the part of any of the residents. There was no problem or provocation that needed to be addressed. The army just showed up in the middle of the night in their armored jeeps and roared through the town, throwing out stun grenades randomly and waking everybody up. And the army calls this making their presence felt. On one occasion, soldiers tackled me to the ground to keep me from filming, which I was legally entitled to do. And here's a clip of that encounter.
Give him his phone. I'm with him. I'm with him. Go. Do not touch me. Do not touch me. Don't touch me. אני יהודי מארצות הברית. אני יהודי. Do not.
Okay. So I was the one wearing the yellow jacket. I know it's difficult to see. We were filming in the middle of the night, but that was a bit of what happened in that particular occasion. And afterwards, just gratuitously, they threw stun grenades at us. Now, we also witnessed home demolitions, as I mentioned, the homes being subject to demolition whenever the Israeli authorities feel like it. Now, I somehow didn't hang on to any of our demolition images, so I'm using these images that I found online, but I can tell you that this is pretty much what we saw. Our partner Auda summed up the situation that they all live under. He and his family go to sleep every night, not knowing whether or not they will have a home to sleep in the following evening. So just try to imagine what it's like to live with that kind of threat hanging over your head constantly. We also documented the aftermath of a pogrom last March in Tuba, where settlers invaded the village and smashed the windows of all the cars. And when we called the Israeli police, they threatened to arrest us for wasting their time. Now, if you've been following the news, you know that in the past year, these sorts of pogroms have gotten much worse in their level of violence and in their frequency. We've read about Huwara and more recently Turmasaya. And I say this with shame as a Jew. The word pogrom is a Russian word, and it originally was used to describe mob attacks and murders targeting Jewish communities around the turn of the century in Tsarist Russia, orchestrated and encouraged by the Tsarist regime. This wave of terror is probably the reason my great-great-grandparents had to flee Eastern Europe. So that Jewish people with this kind of historical trauma could turn around and do the same thing to another people is horrifying to me. And this is a large part of what motivates me to work to redress the injustice that Palestinians now face. So we forwarded the video evidence that we collected each day to Israeli human rights organizations and to lawyers representing the Palestinians in land claims cases. On the positive side, we formed deep relationships of friendship with our Palestinian activist partners, as well as with the shepherds we accompanied and with the ordinary people of the villages where we stayed. For example, when Auda in El Khair heard that it was Zach's birthday, Zach is one of the people in our party, he quickly organized a birthday party for him. Now, I'd never heard of this technology before, but in the city of Yatta, there is a bakery that can make cakes with a custom image of the birthday boy or girl printed in the icing. Now, Auda somehow got a hold of this picture of Zach, apparently terrorized by killer sheep, or pretending to be anyway. Just a second. Okay, here is Zach at the party with the resulting cake. After the cake was served, we went around the circle offering good wishes to Zach or sharing funny anecdotes about him. And we had many such gatherings during our 3 months there with Palestinians, with Jewish Israelis, and with us American and Canadian Jews, all working, eating, laughing, and grieving together, with conversations weaving back and forth between English, Arabic, and Hebrew. We even celebrated the Jewish holiday of Pesach with our Palestinian partners during in a joint Seder Iftar meal, because it also coincided with the Muslim month of Ramadan. Together, we sang Hine Matov Umanaim, which in English means how good and pleasant it is for brothers and sisters to dwell together in unity. And that's precisely what we were doing. So before these experiences, the word solidarity was just an abstract concept to me, but now it has real emotional content, beautiful and powerful. Now, I wish I could end my presentation on this warm and fuzzy note, but on the very last day of our stay in Masafar Yatta came some very bad news. The army had designated much of this district as Firing Zone 918, supposedly as a military training area. The firing zone is marked on the map with a yellow border. You can see it down in the bottom right-hand corner. Okay, contemporary internal documents make clear that this decision was not about any real military need, but purely as a stratagem for getting control of Palestinian land in order to turn it over to settlers. In 1999, the army expelled the residents, but the Israeli High Court at that time granted an interim injunction allowing them to return to their villages pending a final resolution of the case. That precarious state of affairs continued for over 2 decades, but on May 4th, 2022, the final decision was announced, and the High Court completely rejected the villagers' claim, asserting that the Palestinians who had lived there for generations, if not for centuries, were not in fact permanent residents. The army now has the green light to expel the villagers at a moment's notice. But somehow the Jewish settlements within this supposed firing zone are exempt from the expulsion. This seems to be the largest mass expulsion by Israel since the 1967 war. And already the army bulldozers have begun home demolitions, particularly in the southernmost villages closest to the Green Line. And here's a scene from, I believe this is from the village of Jimba, to the south of where we were staying. Now, not all of our Palestinian partners in Masafariyata are directly affected by this ruling. The villages of Al-Khair, Tuwani, and Susia are all just outside of the firing zone, but Tuba is inside it. So the school kids we accompanied every day live inside that firing zone, and likewise, many of the shepherds we accompanied. Well, I'm still going to try to end on a hopeful note. The hope I see in these dark times is in the possibility of Palestinians and Jews standing together for human rights and against the apartheid and ethnic cleansing that we're now seeing. In the midst of the massive anti-Netanyahu protests that continue to rock the Israeli society, there is a block of committed, courageous Jewish activists proclaiming that Jews can't have democracy for themselves while imposing a military dictatorship on Palestinians. Inevitably, the dictatorship will leak back across the Green Line, harming liberal Jews as well. And that's exactly what we've been seeing with the Netanyahu government. Here in Canada, I belong to Independent Jewish Voices, a Jewish organization that supports the call for boycott, divestment, and sanctions, and works to debunk false claims of anti-Semitism that are regularly thrown at the Palestinian Solidarity Movement. The leadership of the resistance movement, I believe, needs to be firmly in Palestinian hands because they're the ones whose lives are on the line. But I think Jews can be crucial allies in this struggle, showing the world that this is not some kind of cage match, Jews versus Palestinians, where one side winning means the other side has to lose. This is about Jews and Palestinians and other allies coming together, standing up for human rights. If we can overcome the vicious, un-Jewish ideology of Jewish supremacy in Israel-Palestine, Jews and Palestinians, I believe, will both be winners. And the same goes for the ideology of white supremacy and settler colonialism here in Canada. Thank you. That concludes my presentation, and I've just included a few websites in the final slide here. I particularly encourage you to check out 972mag.com if you're not familiar with it already. It's an excellent source of news from the ground in Israel, Palestine, and many of the Palestinian partners that we worked with regularly write for that news magazine. I should also mention a small group that I and a few other people are in the process of forming called Reform Jews for Human Rights. So Jews come in different flavors. I'm a Reform Jew, and I'm trying to organize within the Reform Jewish movement for people who say they support human rights for everybody to show that they really mean it for Palestinians as well. And I'll also just mention CJPME, that's Canadians for Justice and Peace in the Middle East. This is not a Jewish organization, but is open to any Canadians who are interested and want to work for peace and justice for Palestinians. Thank you. And I'm now happy to entertain any questions.
Thank you very much, Asher. We're glad that you shared your experiences. Your experiences are simultaneously horrific. I mean, demolition of homes, declaring a refugee area as a firing zone by the government, displacing families, night raids, and whatever you say. And then there is hope too, I believe, the combined parties and birthdays. So there is some, we can hope that there is chance of solidarity. So my next question would be regarding as you spend time in 2022, you spend time, and since your return from the occupied territories, a new far-right coalition has come into power in Israel. Experts have highlighted the worsening condition for Palestinians in the settlements, with an increase in settlement violence. Just a few months ago, there was disturbing incidents, settler violence in some of the villages, as you mentioned. Additionally, in June 2022, Israel launched a significant attack on Jenin refugee camps, which is considered the largest since 2002, according to experts. Given these developments, what is your perspective on the future of settlements and the solution faced by the displaced people in the West Bank? I mean, the situation faced by the displaced people in the West Bank. So, yeah, kindly enlighten us with your analysis.
So, I mean, the immediate future looks very grim. The people in power in Israel now, how should I put it? I've heard many Palestinians say that this is nothing new. The things that the government is doing now, they've been doing all along. And in a way, the situation has not changed. Except I would say that in the past, the government was concerned about maintaining appearances of legality and appearances of wanting peace in order to appease governments in the West. And now there's just no concern for that, and it's like the makeup is off. And so they're being open about their plans. But at the same time, it's quite clear what the plans are, and it's ultimately for outright annexation. If that many people would say that that's already happened de facto, and there are arguments that with some of the measures that this current government is taking, it's now de jure as well. So the situation looks very bad. The government is absolutely intent on putting in as many settlements as possible. And so Palestinians are having more and more land taken away. And one thing that I came to realize from living there, which hadn't been clear to me before, was when you take away land from Palestinians, particularly if they're shepherds, you're not just taking away their houses, you're not just taking away their backyards, you're taking away their livelihood, because they need that land for pasturing their sheep. And without that, they have nothing to live on. Particularly since Israel has done everything it can to prevent any other kind of economic development in the area. If you've got standing demolition orders for your whole village, you can't build up a business. I mean, people do it anyway. They try to the extent that they can, but there's really no possibility for healthy economic activity under that kind of government repression. So, up till now, shepherding and olive cultivation was one of the few forms of livelihood available to Palestinians in the West Bank. But more and more of the land that you need for that is being taken away from them.
Okay, does the Israeli government provide some compensation to Palestinian families who are displaced?
No, I don't believe that there's any compensation. I have heard of cases where if the Israeli authorities think they're not on firm enough legal ground to just take the land, that they will approach Palestinian families and say, look, we'll make you a deal, we'll write you a check for so much money and, leave Palestine. And to their credit, I think most Palestinians absolutely refuse to take that.
Basically, it's ethnic cleansing by pressure.
Yes, I would.
Pressure.
Yes, I would say ethnic cleansing. I would even. Okay, I'm not an international law expert, but from what I have read and heard and seen, the charge of apartheid is certainly warranted. The term ethnic cleansing certainly applies, and I think it would be fair to say we're getting into the realm of what could be called incremental genocide.
So my next question would be, I would like to hear about your experience accompanying children, school children. Do they pass through checkpoints? How they are dealt with Israeli soldiers? I mean, how Israeli soldiers' attitude, whatever you observed, what school children face?
So this was a rural area where there weren't sort of established checkpoints. We accompanied children, as I said, who were coming from the village of Tuba to the town of Tuwani to go to school, and also to go home in the afternoon. And the route for them to make that trip took them nearby a settlement called Chavat Ma'on that is full of very violent extremist settlers who have attacked the children repeatedly in the past. And I'm talking about attacks by grown men against school children. So this started in the late 1990s, these attacks. And at the time, it shocked Israeli society to the point where the government felt compelled to do something. So in this particular case, they made a standing order that an army patrol should accompany the children to protect them from the settlers. Now, I think it's interesting to ask, why didn't they just arrest the settlers who were doing this, which would have solved the problem? But from my observation, settlers enjoy pretty near impunity in their violence against Palestinians in the West Bank. And it shows up in how the government chose to respond to this case. So, every day we would get an army patrol, or most days anyway. As I said, sometimes they didn't show up. And the attitude of soldiers was sometimes they seemed just kind of bored. It was one more thing they had to do that day. In other cases, they were actively hostile toward us, the international observers, the people accompanying the children, or sometimes we had Israelis as well, and they were hostile to them too. And often what they would do is, as soon as they would show up, they would say, this is a closed military zone. All of you internationals have to leave. And we would say, okay, show us the order. And then they would either not have an order, or they would have an outdated order or something. So there was time to be gained by making them prove that it was legitimate. And sometimes they had an order, and we would retreat back a little bit to the point where we still could see the children. But there were some days when they were being the soldiers were being particularly just nasty. And on one occasion, we were joined by a number of Palestinians from Tuwani who showed up because they knew they knew something was going on, and we kind of pushed back a bit, not violently, but we stood our ground when the soldiers told us to move away. And what happened was there was a standoff for a while, and finally the soldiers picked up and left. So that was kind of a minor victory for us.
So thank you very much, Asher, for informing us of all these observations and developments. So my next question is regarding the Canadian role. Considering the global consensus that the regions occupied by Israel in 1967 are deemed as occupied territories, and all settlements in the West Bank, Golan Heights, East Jerusalem are considered illegal, with the expansion of settlement viewed as a war crime, there is a significant standpoint. In fact, Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, Beth Salim declared Israel an apartheid state in 2022. However, there appears to be a reluctance on the part of Canadian government to condemn Israel, to boycott Israel, to avoid providing assistance to Israel, despite the official Canadian position, acknowledging the illegality of the settlements. How do you see that?
Well, it's just a case of massive glaring hypocrisy on the part of the Canadian government. On the one hand, we have these official policies that commit us to certain actions, but on the other hand, in practice, the Canadian government is doing the very opposite. I think we're getting to the point now where the things happening in Israel are so extreme, so well documented, and so shocking to the conscience that the Canadian government is going to have to respond in some fashion. We've already seen that in a very tepid way with some statements recently made by Foreign Minister Melanie Joly. But my hope is that with pressure from Canadian human rights organizations, the Canadian government will be forced to finally stand up and take some meaningful action to start implementing their own policies in defense of human rights.
Okay. So basically, you might know that there is an important new development. On Tuesday, May 16th, the Standing Committee on Foreign Affairs and International Development passed a motion to conduct a study on the actions Canada should take for human rights and international law to be respected and upheld in the region, among other things. This study will span 4 meetings, which will lead to a comprehensive report on the subject. Various human rights organizations will be invited as witness. My first question is, what kind of role can human rights organizations play in unifying and ensuring that Palestinian voices are not silenced or diluted, as is often the case in the media coverage? And the second question is, in your opinion, what actions do you believe Canada can take to ensure the upholding of human rights and international law? So basically, this is a question from the audience.
Yes, thank you. So I think this is a very welcome direction. At least we're seeing some movement or some possibility of movement. But I think human rights organizations will have to apply firm, unrelenting pressure on the Canadian government to do everything that they can to participate in the learning process that committee says it's going to undertake. And yes, as you said, above all, to make sure that Palestinian voices are heard, and not to allow other people to speak for them, or worse, to speak over them.
So basically, what will you advise to human rights organizations? How can they amplify the voices of the Palestinians in the West Bank and in the occupied territories?
So I should clarify that I'm not sort of an expert political strategist. I'm not an expert on international law either. And so my perspective is just as a Canadian citizen and as a Canadian Jew, who now has some very good friends that I care about in Israel, Palestine. And in terms of what can be done, as I said, I think we just need to keep the pressure on any way that we can. We need to be writing to our members of parliament, to members of the cabinet with any sort of oversight of this issue. And the thing to be saying above all is to listen to the Palestinians.
Okay, there is one more question from the audience regarding your experience as an academic. I hope that you will have a perspective on that. I mean, opponents of the BDS say the boycott of Israeli academic institution is an attack on academic freedom. How is attacking children on the way to school not an attack on academic freedom? So how would you encounter this question?
Yes, that's an excellent point. Yes, that's an excellent point, and I think that should be made not only Palestinians, but the whole schooling process for Palestinians is under attack. I mean, schools are being demolished in the area that I was talking about. So that's a valid point, and that point should be made very forcefully anytime that argument is raised against the academic boycott. Now, I think it should be clarified that the academic boycott targets institutions that are complicit with Israeli repression of Palestinians. It is not a general boycott of all Israeli academics. So there is no freedom of, there's no academic freedom being impinged on here. But as you said, the ones impinging on academic freedom are the Israelis, who are seriously impinging on the freedom to learn of Palestinians.
We appreciate your courageous voice. And then there is one more question, but do we think about your safety, and what kind of safety risks do Jewish activists face when advocating for the Palestinian rights? I mean, this is the question regarding your personal eyewitness experiences there.
Mm-hmm. Well, as I showed in that little clip, I got tackled by some Israeli soldiers. Somebody else in our group got hit with rifle butts. But that may sound bad, but I know that for Palestinians, the situation is so much worse. So if we had not been there that night, I don't know what the army would have done. They might have arrested people and beaten people. They've done that before on many occasions. And I'm aware of many, many cases where our Palestinian partners who are committed to nonviolence nevertheless get beaten and imprisoned without charge by the Israeli authorities. So yes, there's some, I was aware that I was facing some risk, but I was also aware that the Palestinians face a far greater risk. And at the end of 3 months, I was able to pick up and go home back to safety in Canada, whereas these Palestinians, this is their life. So, my real concern is with their safety.
Thank you very much, Asher. And would you like to give any message to our audience? How they can contribute to this cause?
Well, if anyone is interested in becoming more active, getting involved with Canadians for Justice and Peace in the Middle East, that's CJPME, is a good place to start. If you don't have time, but you are able to make a financial contribution to CJPME, that would be great. Also, that news magazine that I mentioned is run based on donations that are made by people who care. So if you're able to go to 972mag.com and make a donation there, that helps getting the news out about what's happening on the ground.
Okay, one last question. Having spent a significant amount of time in the occupied West Bank and observing the situation on the ground, how do you envision the collaboration between Justice for All Canada, as we are also running a campaign for Palestinian children who are detained under the Israeli military detention, and most of them belong to the West Bank. Some of them belong to East Jerusalem too, of course. And independent Jewish, is there any chance, can we come closer together and we can collaborate in some way to amplify the voice of the Palestinians and to advocate for peace and harmony in the occupied territories?
So collaboration between Justice for All and IJV, I think, would be a great idea. I think we'd be happy to talk about joining with a campaign about the imprisonment of children. So yes, great idea. Let's do something with that.
Any message for our audience, Asher?
Well, just the basic take-home message of my my talk is that we need to stop thinking about this as a conflict between Jews and Palestinians, and start understanding this as a fight against a mindset of settler colonialist Jewish supremacy, which is a form of racism. And if we cast it in those terms, it's not about pitting one people against another people. It's about both people standing up for justice and peace.
Thank you very much, Asher. And yeah, thank you very much, Asher, for sharing your first-hand experiences, observations, and insightful analysis regarding the atrocities faced by Palestinians in the West Bank. Your contributions have invaluable, and we believe your contributions have been invaluable. And we believe that this talk has shed light on the situation of those seeking to understand the realities on the ground. We sincerely appreciate your dedication to this cause. In the light of discussion, it is clear that Canadian government should reconsider its support for Israel. This could involve discontinuing investment in Israel, ceasing to provide subsidies to charities that collect donations for Israel. Can you hear me, Asher?
Yes.
Oh, that's great. This could improve discontinuing investments in Israel, ceasing to provide subsidies to the charities that collect donations for Israel, and considering the introduction of legislations similar to the proposed in United States, that is HR 3103. By taking these steps, Canada can uphold human rights and international law while contributing to the pursuit of justice and peace in the region. Once again, we express our gratitude for your valuable and unwavering commitment. And then I would like to kindly request the audience, thank you very much for staying with us and watching the webinar. I would like to kindly request the audience to support Justice for All and help raise awareness about apartheid and genocide. There are 3 ways you can contribute. Subscribe to our newsletter, weekly newsletter, and dedicate just 5 minutes of your time to stay informed. Volunteer for JFA causes and actively participate in our initiatives. Donate to JFA campaigns, providing much needed support for our advocacy work. Thank you for watching and for your continued support. Thank you, Asher, for joining us and enlightening us with your experiences, analysis, and observations. Thank you very much.
My pleasure. Bye-bye.